Here we go with part 1 of our story. My name is David Miller. For a significant 17 years, I was the guy who breathed life into the automation systems at Apex Innovations, right here in Denver, Colorado. That's a long time to pour your heart into calibrating machines, writing firmware, and building complex systems that, frankly, no one else truly understood, ensuring everything ran smoothly, often making others look good in the process. Then, Sarah Evans, our new plant manager, dropped the bombshell during our morning huddle. "We're modernizing operations," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the team but never quite settling on mine. "Some positions are becoming redundant." The factory floor, a symphony of sounds I knew better than my own breath, hummed in the background, seemingly oblivious to the shift in my world. This is a story about how that single announcement changed everything. Make sure you subscribe to Life Stories so you don't miss what happens next, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the usual morning sounds of Apex Innovations. "The transition will be immediate. We've contracted with Omnitech Solutions for our systems management going forward." I just stood there, arms crossed, as 35 pairs of eyes turned my way. There was no sympathy, just a raw curiosity, wondering how the old guy would react to being put out to pasture. I gave a single, curt nod and walked back to my station. No drama, no shouting. I'd seen it happen to others over the years. Men who fought, who argued, only to end up gone anyway, just with less dignity. I wasn't about to give Sarah that satisfaction. I started unplugging my laptop, emptying my drawer. The coffee mug my daughter painted for me in 3rd grade, the spare reading glasses, the worn notebook filled with handwritten code sequences, relics of a career built within these walls. Apex Innovations had changed management 3 times since I started. This was the first time they decided I wasn't essential. As I was packing the last of my things into a plain cardboard box, Sarah approached. "Your severance package is generous," she said, sliding a folder across my dusty desk. 2 months' pay, plus your accrued vacation time." "Generous?" I echoed, the word tasting like ash. The folder remained untouched. "David, try to understand," she pressed on. "Your systems are, well, they're outdated. Omnitech Solutions is implementing a complete digital transformation. Cloud-based monitoring, machine learning algorithms. It's where manufacturing is headed." I zipped up my laptop bag. "The calibration files, the core of my work?" "They'll reverse engineer whatever they need," she said, already glancing at her watch as if my 17 years were just a minor scheduling conflict. "Human Resources needs to see you before you leave." I just nodded and lifted my box. Sarah had been plant manager for all of 8 months, an MBA from some fancy East Coast university, always talking about efficiency metrics and optimization protocols like they were incantations. She never once asked how our proprietary systems actually functioned, never questioned why our factory boasted the lowest defect rate in the entire industry, despite running on equipment that was, by her standards, ancient. Walking past the CNC machines I'd meticulously programmed, the conveyor system I'd customized down to the last sensor, and the quality control scanners running on my bespoke algorithms, Sarah's words about outdated systems echoed. She was right in a way. I had built systems that were older, but I had built them to endure. More importantly, I had built them so intricately that only I truly knew how to fix them when they inevitably faltered. My journey with Apex Innovations began when it was still a smaller operation, making automotive components for just 3 car manufacturers. Henry Apex himself, the original owner, hired me straight out of college. I'd shown him how I could reprogram their first robotic arm to move 30% faster without sacrificing an ounce of precision. "Son, you speak their language," he'd said, gesturing towards the humming machinery. "That's a rare gift." For a decade, Henry gave me free rein. I crafted proprietary firmware for every critical piece of equipment, developed calibration routines that pushed aging machines far beyond their expected lifespans. When manufacturers discontinued support for older models, I was the one who kept them humming. When new equipment arrived, I was the one who modified its software to seamlessly integrate with our existing, unique infrastructure. After Henry retired, his son sold the company to Global Logistics Corp., a massive entity looking to branch into manufacturing. They kept me on because the numbers didn't lie. Why spend tens of millions replacing equipment when my algorithms made them perform like brand new models? Then Sarah Evans arrived, young, fiercely ambitious, armed with PowerPoint presentations highlighting how antiquated our Denver facility was compared to competitors. She never addressed me directly in those meetings, preferring to speak about legacy systems as if they were infectious diseases needing immediate eradication. About 3 months ago, I started noticing Omnitech Solutions representatives prowling the factory floor, snapping photos of control panels, quizzing operators. I confronted Sarah. "Are we bringing in consultants?" I asked. "Just exploring some optimization opportunities," she'd replied, tapping away at her tablet. "Nothing for you to worry about, David." The following week, my access credentials to the management server were suddenly, inexplicably, expired. They apologized for the glitch, but only restored partial permissions. I could still perform my daily tasks, but certain critical administrative functions now required Sarah's explicit approval. I mentioned it to Mark, our floor supervisor, and the closest thing I had to a friend at Apex, a guy I sometimes went fishing with on weekends. "Politics," he'd muttered, shaking his head. "New manager needs to make her mark. Just keep your head down, Dave." That very night, I backed up all my calibration files, all my code repositories, onto my personal laptop. This wasn't company property in the traditional sense. It was my intellectual work, years of accumulated knowledge. The systems would run, for a while, until they didn't, until a machine inevitably drifted from its precise tolerance, or a sensor needed recalibration. The fixes were all in my head, and in my private, meticulously kept notes, documented absolutely nowhere else. They were about to learn the true worth of 17 years of institutional knowledge. My severance meeting with Human Resources was brief, a sterile 20-minute affair. Signatures here, explanations of benefits there, the surrender of my building access card. Thomas, the HR manager, a man who'd been with the company almost as long as I had, studiously avoided eye contact throughout the entire process. "Is there anything else you need from me before I go?" I asked, as the paperwork was concluded. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Actually," he began, "Sarah mentioned you might consider a short-term consulting arrangement, perhaps 2 weeks, to help with the transition? Paid at your current rate, of course." I almost laughed. 2 weeks to download 17 years of specialized knowledge? "It would give you some additional income while you job search," he suggested weakly. "I'll pass," I stood up, "but thanks for the offer." Walking out through the factory floor for the last time, I passed Mark. He broke away from a conversation and hurried towards me near the exit. "This is insane, David," he said quietly, his voice laced with genuine concern. I told her flat out, "You're the only one who truly understands how all these systems work together, how they mesh." I managed a wry smile. Apparently, Omnitech Solutions disagrees. "They're salespeople, David. They don't know what they don't know," Mark insisted, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "What happens when the next major calibration cycle comes up? Or when that Southwest conveyor starts making that awful grinding noise it makes every single winter?" I just shrugged. "Not my problem anymore, Mark." "Come on, man. 17 years and you're just walking away like this?" He looked genuinely distressed. I stopped at the door, the cold Denver air hitting my face, and turned back to him. "What exactly do you expect me to do, Mark? Beg for my job? Try to convince Sarah she's making a colossal mistake? You honestly think that would change anything at this point?" Mark had no answer, just a look of resignation. I clapped him on the shoulder. "I'll call you." Maybe we can finally get that fishing trip in next weekend. But as I walked to my car, I knew I wouldn't call. Not for a while. And deep down, I think Mark knew it too. The drive home was silent. No radio, no distracting phone calls, just the monotonous hum of tires on the pavement. My house, usually a sanctuary, felt strangely empty, even though it was filled with the accumulated belongings of 17 years. My daughter was away at college, and my wife and I had divorced 3 years prior. I sank into my home office chair and opened my laptop. A small notification popped up. Apex Innovations VPN. Disconnected. That's when the full weight of it hit me. 17 years. Erased in a single brutal workday. All those late nights I'd spent wrestling with production emergencies. All those weekends dedicated to upgrading systems while the lines were down to minimize disruption. The intimate knowledge of every single quirk, every potential flaw in our aging but reliable equipment. The immense pride I took in our defect rates, consistently the lowest among all our competitors. All of it deemed disposable by Sarah Evans and her modernization plan. I opened my personal hard drive and looked at the backup files I'd so presciently made. Calibration parameters, custom firmware, troubleshooting manuals I'd written over the years but never officially shared. I had no immediate intention of using them against Apex Innovations. But I also had absolutely no intention of just handing them over. They'd made their choice. Now, they would have to live with the consequences. I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, and cracked open a beer. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I didn't have to worry about being on call for a factory emergency in the middle of the night. I should have felt a wave of relief. Instead, a cold, hard certainty began to settle in my chest. They would call, eventually. And when they did, I would be the one to decide what 17 years of loyalty, expertise, and dedication was really worth. 3 uneventful weeks drifted by. I polished my resume, sent out applications, and took a few calls from recruiters. I even managed to spend a couple of afternoons fishing, trying to clear my head. The severance checks from Apex Innovations arrived on schedule, a cold, transactional reminder of my departure. I updated my LinkedIn profile, and messages of condolence and support trickled in from former colleagues now at other companies. But from Apex? Silence. Not a word from anyone, not even Mark. Until my phone finally rang on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after my unceremonious exit. "David, it's Sarah Evans from Apex Innovations." I let the silence stretch for just a beat too long, a small private moment of satisfaction. "Hello, Sarah," I finally replied, my voice calm and even. "I hope you're doing well." Her voice, when she spoke again, had definitely lost some of its previous boardroom confidence. "Listen, David," she began, We're experiencing some rather persistent issues with the southwestern conveyor line, and, well, our team is having considerable trouble diagnosing the problem. I was wondering if you might possibly be available for a quick consultation." "What kind of issues?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, though I had a very good idea. "Random stoppages, mostly," she admitted, "and error codes that don't seem to match any of the existing documentation. Production is down about 20% on that line alone." I closed my eyes for a moment. The southwestern conveyor. The very one I'd specifically warned maintenance about nearly 3 months before my departure. The one that desperately needed its controller firmware updated before the cold Colorado winter set in. "I see," I said. "And what does Omnitech Solutions say about it?" There was a noticeable pause on her end. "Well," she said, her voice a little tighter, "they're still getting up to speed on some of our more, legacy systems." "I'm sure they'll figure it out eventually," I responded, my voice still meticulously neutral. "After all, they're implementing a complete digital transformation, aren't they?" Sarah cleared her throat, a dry, nervous sound. "David, I understand you might feel underappreciated by what happened. But this situation is affecting the whole team. People could lose shifts if we can't get this line back up and running properly. She was good. I had to give her that, appealing to my old loyalty to the floor workers, but I also vividly remembered how none of those same workers had uttered a single word of protest or support when I was being escorted out like a common criminal. "I'm available for consulting," I said finally, breaking the silence. "My rate is $300 per hour, with a 4-hour minimum, paid in advance. And of course I'll need a signed contract clearly specifying the scope of work before I even step foot in the facility." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. That's more than twice your former salary rate," she stammered. "That's my consulting rate, Sarah," I replied calmly. "Take it or leave it." More silence. Then, I'll have to get approval for that. Can I call you back?" "Of course," I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. She called back within the hour. They had agreed to my terms. The next morning, I drove to the familiar Apex Innovations plant in Denver, the same route I'd taken for 17 years, yet everything felt different. I signed in as a visitor at the security desk, a stark reminder of my new status, and was then escorted to the production floor. The southwestern conveyor, usually a hive of activity, sat idle, a metallic beast surrounded by a cluster of frustrated Omnitech technicians and anxious-looking operators. Mark spotted me from across the floor, and his face broke into a wide, relieved smile. "Thank God you're here, David," he exclaimed, hurrying over. The problem, as I'd suspected, was indeed a firmware issue, compounded by some clumsy attempts by Omnitech to tweak parameters they didn't understand. It took me exactly 27 minutes to diagnose it definitively. The solution, however, would require accessing the specific calibration files I had developed and refined over many years, the very files residing on my personal laptop. "I'll need my laptop connected to the control system," I informed Sarah Evans, who had been hovering nearby, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Of course, David, whatever you need," she replied quickly. I connected my laptop, making a deliberate show of searching through various folders, though I knew precisely where the necessary files were located. As I worked, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease, I overheard 2 of the Omnitech technicians whispering nearby. "This stuff should have been documented somewhere," one muttered. "It's a complete mess, these ancient legacy systems." I had to suppress a smile. Legacy, perhaps, but they were my legacy, and they worked. 45 minutes later, the southwestern conveyor hummed back to life, its familiar rhythm restored. Operators quickly returned to their stations, the relief palpable on their faces, as the production line resumed its steady flow. Sarah looked simultaneously immensely relieved and distinctly uncomfortable. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice a little strained. I don't know what we would have done without you." "Happy to help," I replied coolly, closing my laptop. "Will there be anything else?" "Actually," she hesitated, glancing towards another section of the factory, "we're having some, similar issues with the CNC machines in Bay 3. Random quality control failures, tolerances drifting unexpectedly. Could you possibly take a quick look while you're here?" I checked my watch pointedly. "That would, unfortunately, exceed our currently agreed-upon scope of work, Sarah," I stated calmly. "I'd need another contract drawn up for that, outlining the new tasks and, of course, the additional compensation." Her face tightened visibly. "David, be reasonable. You're already here." "I am being perfectly reasonable, Sarah," I countered, my voice firm but polite. "I am treating this precisely as the business arrangement you wanted it to be when you eliminated my position. This is a transaction, nothing more." I packed up my laptop and stood. "Email me if you decide you want to set up another consultation for the CNC machines." As I walked away, Mark quickly fell into step beside me, his expression grim. "It's not just the CNC machines in Bay 3, David," he said quietly, his voice low. "It's everything." The entire system is starting to unravel. Quality control is catching major defects daily, stuff we haven't seen in years. Returns from some of our biggest customers are up nearly 30%. I nodded slowly but said nothing, letting him continue. They're in way over their heads, aren't they? Omnitech, Sarah, the whole lot of them. Looks that way, Mark, I conceded. He glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot, and lowered his voice even further. You saw this coming, didn't you, David? All of it. I met his gaze directly. I didn't have to see it coming, Mark. I built these systems. I know exactly what happens when they're not maintained properly, when unqualified hands start meddling with their core programming. And now you're going to make them pay for it, aren't you? It wasn't really a question, more a statement of fact, but I answered anyway. They already are, Mark. They already are. The calls from Sarah Evans at Apex Innovations became a regular occurrence after that initial consultation on the Southwestern conveyor. Every week, sometimes even twice a week, my phone would ring and it would be Sarah on the other end, her voice increasingly strained, describing another critical system failure, another production line grinding to a halt. The CNC machines in Bay 3 were just the beginning. It was followed by issues with the automated assembly robots, then the laser etching system, and even the primary coolant circulation pumps. Each time, I calmly listened. Each time, I negotiated a new, separate contract, my hourly rate inching slightly higher with every new emergency. And each time, I drove to the Denver facility, addressed only the specific, narrowly defined issue they had hired me to fix, collected my payment, and left. I made no suggestions for broader improvements, offered no unsolicited advice on how to prevent future breakdowns. They had made it clear my comprehensive knowledge was no longer valued. They only wanted specific, isolated fixes, and that's precisely what I delivered. This pattern continued for a little over 2 months after my departure. Then, one Tuesday morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. David Miller, please?" A deep, authoritative voice inquired. "Speaking," I replied. "Mr. Miller, this is Robert Davis, Vice President of Operations at Global Logistics Corp." I sat up a little straighter in my home office chair. Global Logistics Corp. Was the parent company, the conglomerate that had acquired Apex Innovations. This was a different league than dealing with a struggling plant manager. "Good afternoon, Mr. Davis," I said, keeping my tone professional and even. "I'll get straight to the point, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice all business. "Our Denver facility, Apex Innovations, is currently experiencing unprecedented quality control issues. Warranty claims have more than tripled in the last quarter. We've unfortunately lost 2 significant aerospace contracts due to precision concerns, and a third is looking very shaky. Ms. Sarah Evans has informed me that you've been providing ad hoc consulting services for specific technical problems." "That's correct," I confirmed. "I'd like to discuss a more comprehensive arrangement," he stated. I remained silent, waiting, letting him elaborate. He clearly understood the gravity of the situation far better than Sarah seemed to. "We'd like to bring you back as a full-time contractor, Mr. Miller. Initially, a 6-month engagement. Your primary objectives would be to resolve all current operational issues and, crucially, to properly and thoroughly document your extensive knowledge of our proprietary systems for future stability." "I see," I said, leaning back in my chair, a sense of vindication beginning to wash over me. "And what, if I may ask, has happened to Omnitech Solutions?" There was a brief, telling pause on the other end of the line. "We are currently re-evaluating that particular relationship, Mr. Miller." Translation: Omnitech Solutions was being shown the door, their much-vaunted complete digital transformation having transformed into a complete operational disaster. I allowed myself a small internal moment of satisfaction before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Davis, and the transparency. However, I am currently in fairly advanced discussions with several other companies regarding my services. My availability is, frankly, quite limited at this juncture. "Name your price, Mr. Miller," he said bluntly, without a moment's hesitation. And so I did. I named a figure that was precisely 3 times my former annual salary at Apex Innovations, broken down into a monthly retainer for the 6-month contract. Mr. Davis didn't even flinch. "Fine," he said. "I'll have our legal team draw up the contracts today. We need you on site as soon as possible." 2 days later, armed with a lucrative and ironclad contract, I walked back into Apex Innovations. This time, not as a discarded employee or a temporary troubleshooter, but as a highly valued independent contractor, there to save them from a crisis of their own making. Stepping back onto the familiar floor of Apex Innovations as a contractor was a surreal experience. Sarah Evans was conspicuously nowhere to be seen. Mark, now looking even more harried than before, quietly informed me that she'd been reassigned to a different, much smaller global logistics corp. Facility in another state, a corporate euphemism for being sidelined. As I reconnected my personal laptop to the main control systems, a process that now felt both routine and imbued with a new sense of authority, I began to uncover the true extent of the damage. Omnitech Solutions, in their arrogant attempts to reverse engineer my calibration procedures and implement their one-size-fits-all algorithms, had corrupted key firmware across multiple systems. Their vaunted machine learning algorithms, supposedly optimizing performance, had instead allowed critical tolerances to drift so far out of specification that nearly 30% of all manufactured parts were failing final quality checks. The factory was bleeding money and credibility, but the most revealing discovery came when I accessed the management server, this time with full, unrestricted privileges granted by Robert Davis himself. There, in a folder innocuously marked Strategic Plans, I found Sarah Evans' original proposal to the global logistics executives. It detailed, with cold, impersonal figures, how replacing me and my outdated methods with Omnitech Solutions and their modern approach would save the company over $200,000 annually in salary and benefits. The proposal even projected a temporary and acceptable 3% increase in defect rates during the transition period, a risk deemed worthwhile for the anticipated cost savings. Sarah hadn't just eliminated my position to modernize. She'd knowingly, deliberately sacrificed years of established quality and precision on the altar of short-term cost-cutting. She'd gambled that the intricate, robust systems I'd painstakingly built and maintained for 17 years were simple enough for any outside consultant to manage. She'd never bothered to truly understand what I actually did, the depth of knowledge and experience I brought to Apex Innovations every single day. I called Mark into the temporary office they had assigned me and showed him the document. He whistled low, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Wow! She was gunning for you from day one, wasn't she?" "Not just for me, Mark," I replied, gesturing towards the damning figures on the screen. "She was gunning for quality, for precision, for everything this factory had built its reputation on over decades." "So, what's your plan now, David?" Mark asked, looking at me with a newfound respect. "Fix everything and then just walk away again when the contract's up?" I looked at him, a new resolve solidifying within me. "No," I said. "I'm going to fix their systems, restore them to their former efficiency, and then some. And then I'm going to make absolutely sure this kind of catastrophic failure, this disregard for institutional knowledge, never, ever happens again at this company." "How are you going to do that?" he asked, intrigued. I allowed myself a slight, confident smile. "By making myself indispensable, Mark. But this time, in a whole new way, on my own terms." That night, I didn't just focus on repairs. I began designing an entirely new factory management system. A system that would seamlessly integrate all of Apex's existing valuable equipment, the very equipment Sarah had dismissed as obsolete, but with proper, comprehensive documentation, robust fail-safes, and complete, unadulterated transparency. It would be a system that would show executives like Robert Davis exactly what they were getting for their money every minute of every day. And crucially, it would be a system that would require my ongoing consultation, my expertise, to maintain and update, all at my new, significantly higher contractor rates. They had tried to replace me with algorithms and ill-equipped consultants. Now, I would show them what 17 years of dedicated human experience, innovation, and foresight was truly worth. My journey was no longer just about fixing machines. It was about fundamentally reshaping how they valued the people who understood them. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold on Life Stories 1. We hope David's journey resonated with you. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more compelling narratives about challenges, resilience, and the unexpected turns life can take, please hit that like button and, most importantly, subscribe to Life Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you.